Welcome to this webinar called Don't Let Your Users Be Fooled by Advanced Phishing. My name is Matt Morton and I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer at Synergy Technical. I've been with Synergy for about 8 years as a consultant, and I have about 20 plus years of experience in exchange management. On the side, I run a website called vcuramnation.com, which we'll use as an example in this presentation. Let's start with an introduction to email security. Email is a cornerstone of business communication. It's essential for internal and external communications. Even with all of the tools available today for communication, like Microsoft Teams, email is still primarily used for internal and external communication and sending sensitive information out, whether that's to someone you sit next to or someone that is a customer. Along with that, email spoofing and phishing are a rising threat. It is probably the largest attack surface available to hackers, right? You use this to log into Office 365. Attackers are going to be trying to get into your account to access your email. And they will try to do this with phishing and spoofing attempts. So there's a need to protect the legitimacy of your domain names that you use for email. And what we're going to talk about today is how you can leverage DMARC to prevent unauthorized spoofing of your domain. So there's a number of tools out there that you can use that are available to you in the Microsoft stack, like safe links, safe attachments, anti-impersonation policies, and these all work great. But one of the free tools that are available to you are DMARC, and that tool is a very simple and effective way to ensure the legitimacy of your domain. So, DMARC stands for Domain-Based Message Authentication, Reporting, and Conformance. And to really boil it down simply, it is checking to make sure that email that comes from your domain passes an SPF check and includes a DKIM signature. And if both of those things are true, you are basically saying what you want to do with that email, right? So if I have a DMARC policy that I've created that says, if those checks don't pass, then reject those emails, then all of the mail servers around the world that receive your email will comply with your DMARC policy and will reject the email. So this is a way for you to ensure that a spoofer out there that's sending an email as your domain can't pass an SPF check and can't include a valid DKIM signature. Therefore, the message can't be delivered. So over time, as you develop a DMARC plan and you implement DMARC, you are essentially ensuring that only the messages that you agree to can be delivered. Okay, so let's take a moment to draw this out and demonstrate how DMARC actually works. So you have your email service in the corner here. And this can be Exchange Online or something like G Suite or any other email provider that you're using. That's your email service. Down here we have all the other mail servers that you may be interacting with, right? So this can be someone in Gmail, this can be Yahoo, or someone else's Exchange Online tenant, right? Up here we have DNS, and this is the DNS that you manage for your domains, right? And we're primarily concerned with two types of DNS records, and that's SPF and DKIM, right? And then, of course, the DMARC record itself. Now, most organizations probably already have an SPF record. There are a few that don't, and that's okay. It's something that you definitely want to implement. So, we have our email service on the top left here, but we also have what we would call legitimate spoofing, right? And so these are going to be services that you want to allow to spoof your domain, right? So what would those be? Those would be things like Constant Contact, right? MailChimp, Any other email servers that your organization might be running. Maybe you have a third-party application that you have designed or are using. That's going to be all your legitimate spoofing, right? So these are things that are not originating from your email server, but their email is going out using your domain that you want to allow to use your domain, okay? Then there's this other category I like to call shadow IT. And these are going to be systems that your IT department hasn't necessarily known about that are sending email out as your domain, right? So you're going to, when you implement DMARC, you are going to find those systems, okay? So you have all these systems here, and we want to start making sure that they're DMARC compliant. So in the case of Exchange Online, we want to be able to send an email to an external recipient, and that recipient is going to say, okay, let me check your DNS records and make sure that SPF passes a check and that you have a valid DKIM signature on your emails. And if those are compliant, then we consider this email DMARC compliant, and we will go ahead and accept that email message, right? And essentially, that is how DMARC works. Now, there's a couple of different things you can do with your DMARC record itself. You can tell DMARC to reject the email. You can tell DMARC to quarantine it, or you can tell it to do nothing, right? And you would typically tell it to do nothing as you are working through your DMARC implementation so that you can collect information about what is actually being sent out there, right? So when you implement DMARC, you are going to implement with no action being taken. And that is going to start discovering all of the mail services that are sending email using your domain. And so that's where you will gain visibility into your legitimate spoofing and your shadow IT spoofing, and then as well as your illegitimate spoofing. Okay, so let's do an example now. I told you at the beginning of the webinar that I would be using vcuramnation.com as an example. And here I have MX Toolbox I'm using to look at my SPF record. And you can see the results here show that I am allowing a few different services to pass an SPF check, right? DreamHost, which is where the website is hosted, some Cloudflare instances, and then an IP address. So those are the three systems that I am allowing to pass an SPF check. So any email that comes from those three systems will pass an SPF check, right? The second thing I want to show is I have a DKIM record set up in DNS for DreamHost. And so that was, as you saw, that was one of the includes in my SPF record. And here I'm showing you that I have a DKIM record published as well for DreamHost, right? And so that's all there. I have sent a test message from the website to my Synergy account, as you can see here. And you can see my from and to address, right? So everything looks good. And what I want to show you is if we go to authentication results, we can see that the SPF passed because that host was included in my SPF record. The DKIM signature check passed, signature was verified, and as a result of that, the DMARC has a pass, right? So here we're illustrating that DMARC is using those two technologies to ensure they pass, and once they do, DMARC will pass, right? So this is what a valid, legitimate spoofing looks like, right? So if you have illegitimate spoofing out there, one of these two, if not both, technologies will fail a check. And if they fail a check, DMARC will fail as well, which will result in taking action on the email based on how you've set your DMARC policy, okay? So let's talk about the DMARC policy itself. I'm going to turn off screen sharing and take you back to my slide deck. Okay, so now that we've seen an example of DMARC in action, let's just recap and talk about what the anatomy of a DMARC record looks like, right? So I have an example here on the PowerPoint deck, and you can see we have a couple of different variables here. V equals DMARC1 is required, and there's nothing to change there. But P equals none is basically, or P equals reject here is telling us that we want to reject emails that don't pass a DMARC check, right? I mentioned earlier you have a couple of options. You can do none, and we do that typically in reporting mode when we're collecting data about what is doing spoofing with your domain. Typically the next step is, once you have validated that all of your legitimate spoofing is passing an SPF and DKIM check, you would then want to start quarantining those messages, and then once you're completely comfortable with that process, you can move on to a more stringent rejection, which will tell email services to reject email that doesn't pass a DMARC check, right? And then finally, I have a couple of different collector addresses here, and this is these are where you want reports to go. So an important thing to note here is that all email servers and services out there are going to send an email every 24 hours to the collector address that you've specified, right? So every 24 hours, you're going to get an email from G Suite, you're going to get an email from Office 365, Yahoo, etc., etc. Those emails will come to the collector address that you have specified, and that they're basically going to send aggregate reports of all of the messages and the results of their DMARC checks, right? And so you can either comb through these reports, or you can use a third-party service to help aggregate that data and put it into a readable format. And there are a number of different tools out there. The one that we typically recommend is DMARC, but Cloudflare offers a tool. As you can see, I'm using that for my personal use. And there are just a number of different tools to choose from, right? But the idea here is that those tools are going to aggregate those reports, and that's going to give you the visibility into all the spoofing, right? You're not going to be able to tell without reading and parsing through these reports what is actually spoofing your domain. And as I mentioned earlier, you're gonna surface your actual email service that you're using. You're going to surface legitimate spoofing and identify those systems. You're going to surface shadow IT spoofing. And then you're also going to get visibility into all the illegitimate spoofing. You're going to see emails coming from Russia, China, all the usual places where malicious attempts are made at spoofing, right? So that's what the DMARC record looks like, and as you work through your DMARC project, you'll make adjustments to your DMARC record to set the policy. So to recap, let's talk about the business benefits of leveraging DMARC, right? You want to protect your brand and your domain reputation. You want to make sure that any email that's coming from your domain is coming from a system that you have authorized to send an email from, right? And that's going to protect your brand integrity, safeguard your brand from attackers that are trying to misuse your domain to send out fraudulent emails, right? It's going to increase deliverability and trust. So all of those third-party email services out there are going to begin to trust the legitimacy of your domain more and more, and increase the reputation of emails coming from your domain so they don't end up in spam or quarantine or anything like that. And then finally, you are mitigating the risk of email-based threats and attacks from using your domain, right? So it is going to significantly, if not entirely, reduce the ability for someone to, make a phishing attempt using your domain, right? So your users cannot be targeted by external sources that are spoofing your domain any longer. They can use other email addresses, but it can't end at yourdomain.com. And one of the main reasons that we see organizations implement DMARC today is that they need to make sure they're compliant with their cyber security insurance, right? There are requirements there that ensure that you are doing everything you can to protect the legitimacy of your email, right? So there are going to be regulatory compliance requirements, and there are just going to be security requirements from within the organization that are going to require you to implement this technology. So just one final recap of how DMARC itself works. We can kind of break this into 3 phases, right? One is the actual creation of your DMARC record so that you can begin monitoring those systems that are spoofing your domain, right? The second phase is identifying those systems and then ensuring that they then become DMARC compliant, right? So every system you identify that's spoofing, that you want to allow to spoof, legitimate spoofing, you need to ensure that it's in your SPF record, right? You need to make sure that it has a DKIM signature attached to it. So you will go through each system and ensure that it is DMARC compliant, right? And then after you have identified all those systems that are legitimate and validated them, you can then turn on your DMARC record to begin taking action on messaging, right? Synergy has done this for many organizations, and we have a package that we've used many times to ensure we get through this process efficiently and identify all those systems with your organization to make sure they're compliant. All right, so let's go to questions. I think we had a few come through. Someone asked, how long does it take to implement DMARC? That's a great question. Typically, when we first publish the DMARC record, you want to give it at least 2 weeks to properly collect all of the aggregated reports, and that will give us visibility into all the systems we're trying to find, right? So you got your first 2 weeks of discovery, right? And then it usually takes about a week to get all of those systems DMARC compliant. That's because, sometimes you have to chase down who the admin of a particular application is so you can get the information you need to publish, DKIM records and modify your SPF records. So about 2 weeks for discovery, about a week to implement, and then I typically like to give it an additional week to monitor after ensuring everything is DMARC compliant to make sure nothing was missed, and then you're able to turn on your DMARC record. And then in addition to that, you don't if you do use a third-party service for aggregating those reports, you don't need to keep that service around. As you onboard new systems that may relay mail, you may, those systems won't be able to deliver mail spoofing your domain until someone reaches out to you to get them configured. So there's not necessarily a need to keep a third-party tool around, but you can. A lot of the tools come in at around $25 a month, and that's a pretty low fee for the service you're getting. And a lot of our customers like to have the visibility into who's out there trying to spoof their domain, right? So that piece is pretty eye-opening and interesting. The next question we got is, can someone still spoof my domain? And the answer is no, they cannot once you have implemented a DMARC policy. They may be able to spin up a similar domain name, like if you have an M in your domain name, they could do like 2 N's or something like that. We have seen that kind of stuff, but they will not be able to legitimately spoof your domain once your DMARC record is in place. What is the purpose of malicious spoofing? I'd say 99% of the time it is an attacker trying to get into your Office 365 account, right? And once they're in, they will then use that access to begin sending emails to internal contacts or external contacts to try to get them to wire money or send gift cards or things like that. right? So that's really what we see 99% of the time. Do the scams work? Yes, absolutely they do. We have had customers wire money out, go through that gift card process. There's a lot of different things that can happen there, and they are effective at doing so. I think that's it for questions. I appreciate your time, and thank you very much.